Hello and welcome to the latest EnvCast episode. EnvCast is the Society for the Environment podcast, bringing you environmental professionals in conversation each month. I am Emma, the Chief Exec of Society for the Environment. Our podcast is designed to provide insight into the lives of registered environmental professionals, featuring experts from across a wide range of sectors and disciplines. We explore what they do, why they do it, how they got to where they are, and their future ambitions. Each guest is registered with us as a chartered environmentalist, registered environmental practitioner, or registered environmental technician via one of our professional body partners, known as our licensed members. As such, they have been externally verified to confirm they are committed to good practice in their environmental work. To learn more about the Society for the Environment, our environmental registrations and our licensed members, please visit SocEnv.org.uk. So I'm really pleased today to welcome Dan Reading to our podcast. Hi Dan, how are you?
Hi there, yeah, very good. Thanks, Emma.
So Dan, can you start us off just by telling us a little bit about you and the job that you do?
Sure. So I work at World Sailing, which is an international sports federation. So it's a not-for-profit, and I normally tell people it's a bit like FIFA, but it's responsible for everything that's on the water that uses wind. So sailing in terms of windsurfing, big boat sailing, small boat sailing, kiteboarding, and also actually model boat racing. So I'm head of sustainability there, and I've been at World Sailing for about 4 years now.
That sounds really interesting. So just tell us a little bit about what's expected from you in your day job.
Yeah, so, well, first of all, we have a kind of an overarching sustainability strategy that encompasses, so actually World Sailing in terms of an organisation, it's got, within its scope, I suppose, it has 146 national authorities, so 146 countries where there's a sailing organisation that forms our membership, as well as class associations. So we kind of represent 70 million sailors worldwide, and from young, old, lots of different types of boats. So a few years ago now, we looked and sort of thought, well, what are our sustainability kind of what's possible? What can we do in terms of our governance? What can we do in terms of specifications, education, and really had a look at all of the different areas. So we have a mandate now for 56 different targets to work against the Sustainable Development Goals. So we try to work towards 12 of those. So it's everything from circular economy, what boats are made out of, gender equality in terms of participation, eliminating single-use plastics. That actually is a really, really hot topic. So, I mean, it is generally, but certainly for people on the water that can see it firsthand, and everything in between. So the day job, I guess, is spinning a few of those plates and trying to work on those.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot of plates. So what about the kind of the background? What kind of qualifications and experience did you need to get the role that you've got now?
Yeah, so I guess, well, starting off from a young age, had an interest in the environment, and then studied environmental science, geography, carried that through to university, and then worked for, actually my first job was a local authority, because my dissertation was all about pro-environmental behaviour, and it was then waste recycling. Then actually got offered a job at the national, so the Royal Yachting Association, the national association, which is funded by the Environment Agency. And then, so I worked there for about 10 years, and that kind of grew in terms of its scope. So it started off with, I guess, kind of hazardous waste management, recycling, and those kind of things into a much broader role. And then, moved into the role of head of sustainability at World Sailing. So do a lot of, well, previously lots of audits, ISO management system implementation. I've worked across different sports as a consultant as well. But kind of a few paths led me to where I am now, but I feel very lucky to have ended up here.
Yeah, sounds like a really interesting background and a great job to have as well. So tell us a little bit about some of the challenges that you face.
There's lots of challenges. I think, first of all, I guess the biggest challenge is sailing is a sport. Everybody just sort of assumes, well, you're harnessing the power of nature, so it's green. So, what exactly do you do? There can't be much that you need to do. But when you start looking in detail, I guess, about all of the kind of the value chain and just the where we operate sort of globally, and the biodiversity impacts and materials, and the list kind of goes on and on. There's lots of, I think, opportunities. So that's something that is still hugely exciting and motivates me, and that can be applied to lots of different sports. But I think the challenges are, first of all, I guess there's industry side, and then there's individual kind of, it's generally people's hobby, apart from professional sailors. So actually trying to influence people in their downtime is, I wouldn't say a challenge, but you've got people that have been participating, doing something the same way for, I'm sure lots of people listening to this will have the same challenges in different workplaces and environments about trying to change the way that people do things if they've been doing it the same way for 20, 30 years.
I mean, obviously, that broad public awareness of environmental impact has grown massively in recent years, plastics, climate change, and there's now a really big focus on oceans as well. Is that helping? Is that kind of making people more aware of the issues?
I think so. I mean, and also, I guess one of the other challenges is that we speak to a very international audience. So whereas where you have some countries that have, well, first of all, you almost can't watch the news without there being some kind of link to, if it's about climate change or some of the issues in the UK. But in other countries, there's nothing particularly on the curriculum, and there's not as much of a high awareness. So that's something that's a challenge. But yeah, I definitely think that when I mentioned about plastic pollution, for me, that I kind of refer to it sometimes as the gateway drug. So with a lot of, certainly for sailors, as I mentioned, I think it must be something like 99.9% of sailors don't. I mean, who wants to see plastic where you're sailing? At the high performance end, it can, if you get a plastic bag which goes over your rudder, then that can end your race effectively. And there was worries about that happening in Rio in the Olympics there, and you've got these kind of Olympic athletes talking about plastic pollution in the context of performance, but then actually a lot of them are really passionate about it. And you almost can't go to an international sailing regatta now without there being beach cleans and associated activity. It's really something that's a hot topic. So then you kind of use that, as I mentioned, as a gateway drug, and then to talk about all the other issues, because it kind of captures their interest. And then we can talk about climate change, circular economy, and other things.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I guess there's been some really powerful documentaries of people out on all kinds of water sports, kind of showing that kind of plastic pollution that's in the ocean. So that's really interesting. Tell us about a kind of a recent project or a recent area that you've been working on.
Well, one of the projects that so as I mentioned about industry, marine industry, the recreational marine sector is valued at, turnover, I think, about 100 billion a year. So it's pretty big. And then actually what we can try and do, or have been doing through when we regulate the sport, is try and shift that industry to be more sustainable, because compared to the automotive sector, where actually there's quite a lot of regulations, end of life of vehicles regulations and emissions and things like that, it's actually lacking a bit in the marine. So first of all, doing a big carbon footprinting exercise, we found that actually support boats. So if you look at something like the Olympics, for example, you'll see lots of sailors on a boat, but actually what you don't normally see is a coach who's on a boat with an engine, a rib. So we kind of identified that actually that accounts for a lot of our emissions for the petrol used in those. So we did a joint initiative with Paris 2024. So it's the next, Tokyo, and then it should be the next Olympics, and challenging the marine industry to shift away from combustion engines and look at electrification and also possibly hydrogen. So and to put things into perspective, the boats used at the high performance level must account for kind of 0.01% of those types of boats sold. but the manufacturers see that if they can invest in the R&D, that boats that are bought for the rest of the 99%, we can try and influence that through sport. So that's really interesting. And actually, we've seen some really good products being developed because of that. There's already a charging infrastructure in the marine sector. So when you have marinas and things, so we don't necessarily have to worry about that. So yeah, that's been a really kind of interesting project, and I've certainly learned a lot from trying to develop it.
Yeah, that does sound really interesting. As you say, the kind of knock-on benefits right down to the hobby end of the spectrum, I'm sure will be vast. So yeah, that does sound really interesting. So you've talked about lots of areas, from kind of environmental impact assessments and carbon and plastics. Tell us about the difference you think that you make in your role.
That's a very good question. I mean, I suppose where we have our 56 targets and we look at the implementation of those, that's effectively, well, I hope, it's just me and the sustainability team, but I try and, like everybody else, use as many people around me in the different departments to help. But effectively, that's the kind of the blueprint for what we're delivering. And we've got some projects about educating children, so from 6 to 12 in 14 different languages. We're kind of getting 100,000 kids through that program, and that teaches them from what some of the topics I just mentioned, so biodiversity and everything in between. So that, I think, it's more of the education piece. So we can start to educate the kids who are growing up in the sport. But then I guess when we have actual like hard stats about carbon reductions and things like that, there's a number of things that we've done within the organization to reduce those, and also single-use plastic. So we have all the stats that they're kind of actions that have taken place, and not so, I guess, sort of soft achievements as the education piece.
Yes, it's interesting you talk about kind of education and those youngsters, because my next question for you was actually about you at that age. What was the first kind of realization about the environment that you had? What was the thing that really triggered you into then moving on to geography and environmental sciences from there?
Well, I think, and I mentioned before we recorded this, my wife's a teacher, so I think actually having good teachers, so that I had for geography and environmental science, that's something that I can remember well. But I mean, for me, I was always a kid kind of growing up spending a lot of time outdoors, so I guess it was always an interest. But then in terms of sort of milestones, before university, I took part in a conservation project, which was about diving, started to learn a little bit more about, I suppose, the mechanisms of protecting certain areas, and well, this was marine protected areas. So that, I think, kind of gave me a bit of an insight. Then went on to university, and then I guess the rest is sort of history. But yeah, I think I think as well, like people through outdoor activity. So whether that be, for me, it wasn't sailing actually, but just spending time outdoors.
That's really interesting. It's a very common answer that we get from people, is about just that time outdoors with nature. And I think that's one of the things that the pandemic has reminded everybody as well, of the benefits of outside as well. So you're a chartered environmentalist with us, and we're very kind of proud to have you. How important is it for you to be recognised as an environmental professional?
Yeah, it's very important, I think, because certainly right now there's lots of short courses to, you get a certificate saying sustainability expert or something after a week-long course. So I think it's important to have the differentiation, to be recognised through peers, that you have the experience. And I've had a number of times when I've had to stand up in front or present to marine businesses, regularly sailing yacht clubs, and occasionally I have people who say, well, what are your qualifications in this? Because sometimes, different pitches, different people, but occasionally, when I'm talking about let's all try and change the way we're behaving, sometimes people straight away kind of get, I defensive, and then it's, what qualifications have you got, and then actually to say, well, a chartered environmentalist is something that resonates. And teaching as well on a chartered marina manager course, where I do environmental training within that course, is also good to have that chartered status.
Yeah, excellent. So what would you say to other people who are thinking about a career in the environmental profession, as broad as that is?
Yeah, well, first thing, go for it. And we do quite a bit with universities, actually. So as a way of getting research in a number of areas, but also we have a few interns. So it's something that I think, well, I certainly, and I'm sure others will have seen, there's far more interest than when I was at university. And then I suppose converting that into working within the sector. So I think my advice is always to kind of try to start off with a broad approach, and then to try and find your niche. And different people have maybe different suggestions on that, because I guess you could carve a niche in environmental management systems, for example. But I think I've certainly carved a niche for sport and sustainability, and applying it in that way. And I found that to be pretty beneficial.
That sounds great, and I'm sure the people that you've been helping through their sailing will then take that back into other parts of their life as well, and that kind of impact rolls on from there. So yes, and I echo it. There's masses of opportunities out there for the environmental profession, and they're just growing all the time. So it's a great career for people to get into. So what's next for you?
Well, hopefully Tokyo Olympics, but there's a few question marks there. So I guess it's chipping away at all of the different targets that we have. I'm also co-chair of the United Nations Sports for Climate Action Framework. So we have a number of signatories ranging in size of organisations. So everything from Olympic Games to Liverpool Football Club, and everyone in between. So that's kind of a really strategic piece about trying to get all of collectively, and it's international, collectively all of these sports entities to start firstly reducing their own carbon emissions, their supply chain, their sponsors and fans. And as soon as you kind of account for all of those groups that they can influence, that's pretty big. And that's
quite a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, the Olympics, I think, gets like 2.5 billion people watching, and so I think that's the power of sport. And there's a good analogy in the US where they're saying that when we're talking about climate change in particular, they reference something like 15% of the population would regularly read scientific journals, whereas 70% around that regularly follow sports. So in some ways, it's a really good mechanism to engage. I think there's obviously a balance because you've got the people that follow sport as an entertainment kind of business or property. Then you've got the people that participate. But I think there's still a lot of work to go. But I think there's definitely that kind of possibility to engage more people about environmental issues through sport.
Yeah, it certainly sounds like heading in the right direction as well. So one last question. If you're world leader for a day, what would be the first thing that you would do?
If I was world leader for a day? Ooh, yeah, that's a very good question. Well, I think it would depend which country it was to look at policy and what's there. And I think it's really interesting looking at, especially starting to get involved with kind of different UN organisations, about seeing the kind of the politics behind getting pledges signed. So at the moment, one of the things we're working on is the 30 by 30. So to try and get, we're looking at specifically with oceans, so trying to get at the Convention of Biological Diversity to get everybody to sign up to pledge essentially to designate 30% of the world's oceans by 2030. So if I was world leader for the day, a true world leader, I'd certainly start signing up to a few of those initiatives, I think.
That's great. Dan, that's brilliant. Thank you ever so much. Been really interesting speaking to you, and good luck with Tokyo and whatever comes next.
Great. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. If you're curious to hear more about Chartered Environmentalists, Registered Environmental Practitioner, and Registered Environmental Technicians, please take a look at our How to Become and Why Become recorded webinars on our website, socenv.org.uk. Or you can find them on our YouTube channel, Society for the Environment, where you will also find a variety of topical environmental webinar series and various different insights from registrants. You can also follow us on Twitter at SocEnv_HQ to keep up to date with all of the Society's latest news. We will release a new episode on the first Wednesday of each month, so if you're interested in our future podcasts, please subscribe to hear more from us. You can subscribe and review through a variety of platforms such as Apple Podcasts, Spotify and Castbox. Thank you for listening or watching on YouTube. We look forward to the next episode next month.